Hey, it's Tony with Parawareness. The following is a discussion conducted by me and my co-host, KEVIN ORR. I was honored when Kevin asked me to help interview today's guest, a retired psychotherapist by the name of Jerry Marzinsky. Jerry spent decades working with voice-hearing schizophrenics and wondering why no one paid attention to what the voices were saying. Marzinsky claims the voices run patterns which are predictable between patients, which hallucinations shouldn't be able to do. And yet somehow this is a highly controversial opinion in the medical community. According to mainstream science, Jerry Marzinsky is making some outrageous claims in this video, and you'll notice that Kevin and I chose not to challenge him on any of it. We wanted to get to know the man and fully understand his story instead of looking for opportunities to tell him how he was wrong. There was a lot to cover in an hour, and many things didn't make it into the discussion, so we do have plans to talk again soon. I hope in future talks we can discuss the targeted individual connection, but this particular conversation focuses around Jerry's work with schizophrenic patients and the MACE energy healing method. Just to be clear, we are not endorsing everything Jerry Marzinsky says here. We're examining one man's experience and letting him tell his story. We had a lot of fun with Jerry. As soon as he saw that we were wearing hats, he rushed off to get his own hat and join us in our hat solidarity. I'm glad we were able to have a little fun while discussing such a serious topic. So I hope you enjoy episode 2 of the Parawareness channel. To support us, like and subscribe. And now, here is Jerry Marzinsky. Today we're talking with Jerry Marzinsky. And I want to say, first of all, this might not be the typical Jerry Marzinsky interview because unlike a lot of the podcast hosts who interview him, he's been interviewed many, many times. Both Kevin and I have experienced the same thing or similar things as many of Mr. Marzinsky's schizophrenic patients. And so it's almost like the patients are getting to interview the doctor in this situation. So good. Now, you spent 55 years in this field. You know your stuff. And so in that time, you found that the voices of these schizophrenics were running patterns. The voices were running these same patterns over and over that were identifiable, and that should not happen in a brain malfunction, which is what they say schizophrenia is just your brain malfunctioning. And when you realized this, you started sending your patients away with what you call homework assignments. And that was one of my favorite parts because you knew it was against the rules, if I remember right. And could you tell us, to start off, about this time when you were breaking the rules and you started this non-sanctioned research is what I'm seeing it like, right? What about that time? Because it seems like it would be scary. Were you scared?
Well, there were times I were terrified. You know, as I was moving in on these things and getting closer and closer to what they were and learning how to interfere with them, they did not like it. And they made that clear. But that was many years after I started. So, you know, I first started at Central State Hospital, which is was one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals on the planet at the time. At the time I got there, I think there were 10,000 patients there. And, you know, I was taught like everybody else, you know, after graduate school, they had taught us that these voices were hallucinations. You know, hallucinations, you think hallucinations are garbage, you know, like verbal cabbage. I mean, you know, not make any sense. I mean, that's how hallucinations are. They're all over the place. What amazed me was when I got to the state hospital, there were hundreds of staff there. You know, and I would ask all of them, well, what do you think the voices are? And it was like, either we don't know, most of them would say they're hallucinations, okay? And they weren't the least bit interested. So I started asking the patients myself after a while. You know, the first thing I found was that they were consistently negative. They never said anything positive. It was always negative. It was always rotten. You're no good. You're nobody likes you. You're stupid. You're ugly. Every rotten thing you can think of, they're feeding these people. Right? And it never varied from that. So I was taken aback after talking to scores of them. It was always the same thing. They were consistently negative. So hallucinations they don't run patterns like that. They're all over the place. I've dealt with people who are hallucinating in the ERs. They're, it's positive, it's negative, they're all over the place. They're not consistent. So my first question is what holds these things on a consistently negative trajectory? How come they're not random? How come they're not sometimes positive? How come they're not sometimes negative? Why are they always negative? Right? So that was my first question. I had no answer, but I saw it. Second thing I saw was I had one patient come in once and he said, well, I was reading the 23rd Psalm when my voices came, and he said they reacted like worms thrown onto a hot frying pan. They couldn't stand it. So every time I heard something like that, I didn't just take it for granted. I wanted to check it out. So I started handing out the 23rd Psalm to a bunch of my schizophrenics. I'd say, hey, when your voices come, repeat this and tell me what happens. They didn't like it. Yeah. Consistently, the voices didn't like it. Yeah. So it's like, then I started questioning them, like, what happens when you go to church? I talked to dozens of them, and there were three categories. If the voices were very weak, when they went to church, the voices shut up. If they were moderate strength, they picked up and they started yelling and ranting and raving and saying the preacher was stupid, stuff like Jesus couldn't even save himself. What makes you think he's going to help you? And blocking out so the person couldn't hear the sermon. If they were very strong, they would drive the person out of the church. He would just jump up and run out of that church. Right. And that was after interviewing scores of them. So my second question is, what kind of hallucination would be anti-religious? Right? The third pattern I found was that they were complaining that after the voices came, they were wiped out. They had no energy. They were drained. One guy told me that he was so drained he couldn't even get out of bed to eat breakfast in the morning. He said he was as tired as if he were digging ditches in the hot sun all day. And all he was doing was rolling around in his bed. So then I started asking dozens of schizophrenics, what's your energy level like after the voices come? And they all consistently said, I don't have any energy after the voices come. Right? So what I did is I did a little experiment. I had a 1 to 10 scale, just a simple 1 to 10. How much energy do you have before the voices come? How much energy do you have after the voices attack and leave? Right? So there was a very noticeable difference, and I think we ran an analysis of variance on it at the time, and it was statistically significant. There was something going on. The patients didn't much realize it because they felt rotten the whole time. They were paranoid, they were scared, they were anxious, they were a mess. So just having that energy level thing that they didn't even notice it was just part of the icky feeling from the overall psychosis. I would ask them, well, where did your energy go? The consistent answer was, I don't know. So I ask them, I'd say, well, okay, the voices has attacked you thousands of times over the years, and each time they attacked, your energy was gone. Where do you think it went? Well, I don't know. And I'd say, well, if you stuck your hand in a fire 10 times and each time you got burnt, what's burning you? They had no trouble with, well, it's the fire. Well, if the voices came 1,000 times and each time you were drained of energy, where do you think your energy went? It's 1-to-1 correlation between the voices showing up and your energy disappearing. They don't want them to know that they're parasites. And if you go to tell the schizophrenic patient that these voices are parasites, they're stealing your life energy, the voices they don't like that. They get all upset. They start screaming and howling and all kinds of stuff. So the last 10 years I was working for somebody else. I was working in the hospital emergency rooms doing psych crisis. They didn't want you working with patients there. They wanted our job, according to the hospital, was to get them out of the emergency room because the doctors didn't know what to do with schizophrenics. So basically what I was faced with was, what little information can I give these people that would at least give them some chance of recovering? And one of them was what the voices weren't them. They were separate from them. Right. Their intention was very different from their intention. And the second one was that they're parasites. So, if you had a parasite hanging on your arm, would you just let it there? No, you do something to get rid of it. Right? So it's the same thing with the patients. Once they found out that these things were parasites, that they were sucking their energy, now there was a split. And now that you have to make that split. If they're going to recover at some point, they have to understand that those voices they're not them. They're not them. They're coming in from the outside. But if the patient asks the voices, who are you? The traditional answer the voices gave back was, we are you. They wanted the person to believe that the thoughts that they were hearing in their head that came from the voices were actually the person's thoughts, that they belonged to them.
Yeah.
Now, we're trained to do that from the time we're kids. You think, well, every thought that comes into your head belongs to you. It's common thought. It's common belief. Not in this case. Those voices are coming in from the outside. They can read your mind. They can pull up every rotten thing you've ever done, and they can just rub it in your face until you're feeling rotten and guilty about yourself. So here they are running patterns. So if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia says they are. The psychiatric mafia has no research whatsoever into the voices. They just believe they're hallucinations. Based on what? Nothing. They have no research. They have no backing. It's only they look like hallucinations because what else could they be?
Yeah.
And of course, Big Pharma went along with that and go, okay, our medications will treat the symptoms. Those medications they give out don't cure anything. All they do is treat symptoms. They might lessen the voices, they might weaken them, but 99% of the time they don't get rid of them. They're major tranquilizers. So they're like drugging your brain, calming you down, and the voices don't like that because they want you agitated. They want you fearful. They want you angry. They want you feeling guilty. They feed on those negative emotions. That's their food. They call it loosh.
Loosh, yeah. So how many of your patients that you treated over the years complained of hearing a high-pitched ringing noise at all times? Not tinnitus, but just almost like a tuning fork or like glass scraping on glass at all times, just this high-pitched ringing that would often penetrate the head.
I haven't heard any of them complain of something like that.
See, now this is something that is experienced. In fact, we did a survey recently amongst a pretty large body of targeted individuals, and it was an overwhelming amount, 80%. It was the highest experienced symptom shared amongst everybody, was a consistent high-pitched ringing noise. So I got curious.
How do you know it wasn't tinnitus?
There's a big difference.
Well, I hear tonight. Right now, I hear a high-pitched buzz in my ears right now. I have riding motorcycles, shooting guns. I mean, tinnitus.
This is different. Yeah.
For me, what it is that there is a sentience or a feeling that accompanies this sound, and so it feels it's almost like it can communicate with me. Kevin, is that similar to what you go through?
No, man. I always perceived mine as just a means to create anxiety in my mind because the frequency would fluctuate. It would go really high, and then it would kind of come down, and then it would go from one hemisphere to the next, back and forth, boom, 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 really fast. And then it would kind of die down again, and then I would fall asleep, and when I'd wake up, it felt like it was accumulating inside of my brain to the point where it was creating swelling in my brain and brain fog for about the first hour in the morning. So I got curious with this, and I said, I wonder if this is actually experienced within the schizophrenia community. So I made a post in the schizophrenia community on Reddit, which has over 100,000 members in it, and I blew up. An overwhelming amount of people that are diagnosed as schizophrenia are also now experiencing this high-pitched ringing. So then I made the same post in experiencers, and boom, again, everywhere I make this post, this high-pitched ringing noise, it's like a frequency. It's being experienced all over the place, all over the planet, all over these different communities. And it has been, besides the incessant playing of music in my head over and over and over again, it's been the most consistent symptom that I've experienced over the past 2 years. So my voices started 24/7, July 28th of 2023, after I got sober. right? So they had started while I was engaged in methamphetamine use, right, which is very common.
Oh boy, that'll open you up.
Right. So then I
That's
found
like,
out that
come on in.
I found out that my girlfriend was pregnant, and I said, "That's it. I got to get it together." So I checked myself into a rehab. I already went through detox. I was clean. And then the voices came back that night after being quiet all day, and they said, "Are you ready, Kevin?" And I remember just being inside, and then all of a sudden, boom, they turned my entire room into a planetarium. Stars, galaxies, alien faces, human faces, mountain ranges, and I remember complex geometrical patterns all over the place. And this went on for about 2 hours of just this. And it didn't matter if my eyes were closed or my eyes were open. If my eyes were closed, I'd see it clearly. If my eyes were open, it would overlay everything in my room.
Wow.
And then from that point on, that's when they started doing 24/7 voices, and primarily 3 of them at all times. And now my experience has been a little bit different. They would play nice, and then they would play negative. So they would go on a pattern for about a week. They would say very ego feeding statements. You're the greatest thing that we've ever come across on this planet. You're going to change the world someday. You're going to write a book that's going to, and I would believe it, right? Because I'm in a bad place. I'm trying to recover. I'm in rehab. Like my girlfriend's pregnant. Like I'm not doing well in life, right? So I'm like, right. And then how effing stupid are you? You really believe that about yourself? And then just crush me, Jerry. I mean,
Yeah.
and I would flip out. Absolutely. Like it would, and they did it over and over and over again until eventually I didn't care anymore, and then that's when I really started doing that. That's a lie. That's a lie. That's, over and over again. That's a lie.
Good.
But it was
I've seen them play good cop, bad cop.
Oh yeah.
They'll come in there. They want to get the person's trust.
Right,
So they might come in and say, "Well, I'm Jesus, or I'm a spirit that can help you," or play like they're a good guy and that they can help them out somehow from the spiritual realm. Once they get their trust, man, they get their claws in them. Then they turn on them, twist the knife.
Yeah,
that's pretty consistent.
There was something I noticed that I wanted to run by you to let me know if this makes sense to you. So a lot of us hear the voices intertwined with ambient noise. And I don't know if is this something. Okay.
What that does is it gives them the energy. So they can ride in on like the sound of a fan or the sound of static, or they can ride that energy.
Okay. Yeah, because I hear it in like running water, fans especially, like the bathroom fan, wind, even cars rolling down the street, But I would also hear it in like cricket chirps, as if the voices are going at all times, but it's almost like they're speaking to the part of the mind that's responsible for filtering out ambient noise. And it intermingles with that ambient noise. So I kind of started going down that road a little bit. And then what I did was I found out that ambient noise goes directly to the subconscious mind. It bypasses the conscious mind because it's safe noise. We don't need to analyze ambient noise. We've heard it our entire life. I know that the wind is safe. I know the bathroom fan is. I know running water is safe. These are all safe things. It goes directly to the subconscious mind. So when the voices are intertwined with ambient noise, they bypass the conscious mind that's responsible for analyzing this and saying, is this bullshit or not bullshit? Goes directly to the subconscious mind, which takes everything literally, and you have no choice but to believe every single word that they say.
Wow. I didn't never thought about that.
Yeah. And that's a big trick that they play. And then once I realized that, I came to understand that what they're doing is they're creating a battle between the subconscious mind and the conscious mind. This part of us that takes everything literally and can't tell an imagination apart from reality, right? Our memory from, and then they associate themselves with every part of your memory, every single thing that you have ever thought, everything you've ever experienced, all of you, and your emotional state, that's your subconscious as well. And then they put it against your consciousness, the part that analyzes everything, the part that says, should I believe this or not? And now there's a battle between the two. And that, and that's what tears the mind, and then you're left feeling so stupid. How can I believe this over and over? And that's hell. They bypass the conscious mind and go directly to the subconscious mind. So once I made that connection and I began doing mantra work, right? Like subconscious reprogramming, mantras over and over and over again every day. Oh, just cleansing it. You're a liar. I don't believe a word you say. You're taking advantage of my subconscious mind. These things, they quiet it down a lot. Like I took a big weapon away from them in doing that.
That's interesting. Now I have heard that, but it's not the majority of schizophrenics that hear sounds coming out of the radio or the fans or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's a fair number.
Yeah.
I'd say maybe a tenth or something like that.
Right.
That they hear the voices carried on the noise. But that's interesting what you say, because it makes sense.
Yeah.
What you're saying makes sense.
Now, how they do that, I don't know, but I do believe wholeheartedly that that's what they do. And once I called them out on that, they started lying about it. Now, that's not what we do. And then I was like, that is definitely what you're doing. And now you just sound like an idiot, because like I know that and you know that I know, and now you're just lying to yourself. And that, and then reprogramming my subconscious mind like that, I mean, it did wonders. It did absolute wonders, because I called them out on their
Did they get upset when you did that?
No. It was almost it's this whole experience for me has been so weird. It's almost like they intentionally will do things because they want me to overcome them. And I was raised Christian. I was educated Christian. I went to Liberty University. So those Christian roots are very ingrained in me. I've done a lot of missions work, so, and then when this first started and I cried out to Jesus and they mocked me, I remember how deflated.
Yeah, they don't like that.
They don't like it. They didn't even care. They were like, oh, really? You think that's going to work? So, and I remember at that moment making a decision that, it wasn't so much that God had turned his back on me or I had grieved the Holy Spirit, as the Bible likes to say. I just had to do some serious self-work, a lot of self-work. Like I really had to get to be comfortable with me, a lot of self-awareness, a lot of self-reflection, and a lot of self-acceptance. Because for as long as I did not accept myself, they would utilize all of my unacceptance of self as ammunition and just hammer me with it over and over and over again until I addressed it appropriately, and then they would stop. Like they just so, and that's one of the questions I have from the audience when we get to that. Like, have you experienced something like that, and what is your perception on a lot of this just being an orchestrated routine that can be gotten through when we go to a level of self-awareness? And maybe that's what all this is about.
Well, see, that's where MACE comes in. I mean, it can go in there and it can clean out those big pools of negative energy buried in the subconscious mind.
Can you describe MACE for the people that may not know?
Okay, what MACE is a cutting edge, relatively new energetic psychotherapy. So your spirit is energy, your thoughts are energy, your mind is energy, your feelings are energy, your emotions are energy. What MACE found was that most psychological problems come about during a trauma. There's a lot of pain. Okay. Now the human organism doesn't like pain. It can't function well while it's in pain. So getting rid of that pain is a survival technique. Right? So once that pain's there long enough and it's hanging around too long, the ego shows up and goes, here, let me handle this. And it takes it and it buries it in your subconscious mind, and then it locks it down. All right. Once it's locked down, it's sealed there. It's not dead. It's sealed in there alive. So it affects. It's like they call it a negative identity. Okay. There's two kinds of identities. There's positive identity. There's negative identity. Positive identity is kind of like you both drive cars. That was a car driver identity that you developed on your own, all right, on purpose to help you survive on this planet. And when you first started driving a car, it was like you had to pay attention to every little move you made. You had real cautious and careful. Now you get in your car and your car driver identity pretty much takes over. It's driving on its own to wherever you want to go while you're thinking about something else, right? So a negative identity is kind of the same way. Once it gets buried in the subconscious, it's no longer available to the patient, but it's affecting their behavior. It affects what they say, what they don't say, what they think, what they don't think, how they react to situations. It affects their emotional state. It affects everything negatively. And the way you feel it is like when somebody who like traumatized you, and cause this negative identity to be there, shows up in your psychological sphere, that thing goes off. And it's basically saying, hey, this guy's too close to the guy that caused this damage in the first place. Either attack him or run from him or avoid him. All right. So it's like that person you hate that keeps showing up all the time. The other way it shows up is when you get into a jam for something and you swear to yourself, I'm never going to go there again. I've had enough. I've been there 3 or 4 times now. I'm not going to have to let it happen again. 6 months later, you're in the same place again. You go, how did I get here? I swore I wouldn't let myself get here. That thing, that negative identity. So every time that thing triggers, it gets stronger. All right. So basically, it's energy. It's like a car battery. Okay. When you start a car, the car charges the battery. Okay. It keeps the battery full. So when this negative identity goes off, it charges that pool of negative energy and adds to it. And it causes all kinds of problems in your, physical universe. So if you get that car battery, even if it's brand new, you drain it down to nothing. You can't use it. It's dead. It stays dead. Okay. So what John Mace did was he found a way to structure a mental construct to tap into that negative identity. Identify its components. So these are general components of a negative identity. That negative identity is fearful, angry, sad, frustrated, abused, distrustful, guarded, confused, resentful, trapped, unsafe, depressed, sad, all these negative traits. Okay? So what you're doing is taking that pool of negative energy and you're bringing it closer to physical reality with these emotional traits. Okay? And then you take those traits and bring them one step closer to physical reality by turning them into an image, a picture. So Mace says the mind thinks in pictures. And he also said that all the mind does is creates pictures of where you put your attention. He said the spirit does everything else. It does the thinking, it does the reasoning, it does the rationale, it does everything else the spirit does. All right. So you can see your spirit leaves your body. You don't see anymore. You don't hear anymore. You don't think anymore. I mean, and Swedenborg said the same thing. It's your spirit that sees. It's your spirit that hears. It's your spirit that tastes. So what Mace does is you turn that negative identity into an image, okay, and then focus on that image. And that image serves as a conduit to the spirit. Mace was a ship captain, so he had to know about electricity, how it flows. He had to know about navigation. He had to know about magnetism. He had to know about all these things that he was able to put this together. So he found if you take that thing, you turn it into an image, that's the conduit to the spirit if you can hold your attention on that image. All right? And then the spirit will not destroy it, but change it into positive potential. So it's turning negative energy into positive energy. And what the person feels once that image disappears, they feel a lightness automatically. They feel relieved. They feel lighter. They feel freer. And that thing is gone. It's like draining the battery. That negative identity, it just is drained, just like draining a car battery. You're draining that negative identity. Then it's no longer there, and it's kind of sad in a way because I work with these people that are, like 60, 70 years old. Something happened to them when they were, 6 or 7. Their mom said something to them that really, really hurt them really bad. And during that trauma, they formed the idea that, well, I'm worthless or I'm unlovable, right? And they go through life like that. So they're unmarried because of that. Their relationships are shot because of that. You get rid of that, and they're free to go again. So there's an explanation, and there's some videotapes on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. You can also find a full list of those patterns that the voices run under articles.
You're obviously a harsh critic of the pharmaceutical industry. Do you feel like there was malice or just greed involved with with them allowing these medications and promoting these medications? Do you feel like that there was some sort of control mechanism going on, or was it just greed?
It was both. So Eli Lilly came out with Prozac in the 1980s, and they had to explain how it worked. So they made up this complete lie. There was no backing to it. There was no research behind it. They went, well, Prozac's a chemical, and the brain is full of chemicals, and it does something to the serotonin, which they didn't fully understand. So they just made up like, oh, our drugs treat a chemical imbalance in the brain. If it's treating a chemical imbalance, then it would seem that the psychiatrist would need to know which ones of those are out of balance and by how much. What's the baseline? What tests are they using to figure out which ones are out of balance and by how much? And I'm watching, and none of the psychiatrists are using any kind of test to find any kind of baseline. And I'm like, well, why is that? And I asked one, I said, well, listen, you're this is caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain. How do you know what's out of balance? By how much? Oh, the drug companies take care of that. We just follow their recommendations. And those drugs don't cure anything. They're treating symptoms. They're tamping down symptoms. At the same time, the global antipsychotic sales in the U.S. have soared to $14.54 billion in 2021. I'm not talking about million. I'm talking about billion. These people are making a fortune on selling these toxic drugs that have horrible side effects, and actually are shrinking the brain and causing neurological damage with long-term use. So they found that out when they started doing autopsies on long-term psychotic patients in state hospitals. Once they started cutting them open after they died, they looked at their brains and they saw they were shrunk like walnuts. And they went, hey, the only difference is that they've been on these antipsychotic drugs. Otherwise, they've been treated like all the other mental patients under the same circumstances. So it must be the antipsychotic drugs. So these were, reputable researchers. So they put out a paper. Now, if the APA found out about that, they would have blocked that paper. The drug companies control the universities. So they block anything that goes against their interest. They would have blocked a paper like that. But this one got out. And when the psychiatrists and the psychiatric mafia found out about it, they went, oh, no, it's not our drugs. It's the schizophrenia that's doing this to them. So the researchers went, no, we're seeing this over and over again. So what they did is started feeding those same drugs to rats and monkeys and mice, and found that the same thing was happening. Their brains were shrinking. There was permanent neurological damage to not only their central nervous system, but also their peripheral nervous system. Irreversible damage, the drug caused by these drugs with long-term use. And I never saw a psychiatrist ever tell a patient about the dangers of these drugs. The side effects of those drugs start with a neurological tremor, and then they move up to tongue darting, where the tongue is going, nah, nah, nah. They can't control that. All right. So they're making billions of dollars on the sale of these antipsychotic drugs to cure absolutely nothing, tamp down symptoms, and they're telling the patient that there's a biochemical imbalance in their brain, and they're still doing this even though it's been disproved over and over and over again. Same thing with antidepressants. The antidepressant market is expected to reach $15.98 billion by 2023. Billion. So what you have here is a mental health system that's based on a lie. Not only are those diagnoses that they spit out completely fabricated, there is not one single objective test to measure any of those diagnoses at all. They're all subjective. They're all made up by a team of 13 psychiatrists or so that meet once every few years, 2/3 of which are associated with the drug companies, and they make up these psychiatric illnesses. That whole DSM, which is their Bible, is a collection of made-up, fabricated mental illnesses.
And you see this in the reverse order with narcotics in this country. So I don't know if you've ever seen the experiment. I think it was done back in like I want to say the 1940s or 1950s, when heroin started kind of getting big in this country. And what they did was they took a rat and they put a rat in a cage, and inside, and it was a small cage, right? And inside the cage, there were 2 water bottles. One was just regular water, and the other one was water laced with heroin. And the rat would go to the water laced with heroin 10 times out of 10, to the point where it would overdose and kill itself. Every single rat that they put in there would do this. And it was all for this experiment that they decided to create a lot of these rules around heroin and how bad it is for people and how just overdose. And then they started this war on drugs. Well, I want to say about 30 years ago, another doctor comes along and he looks at this experiment and he said, something's terribly wrong here. So what he did was he created what he referred to as Rat Park. And it was a huge cage. I want to say it was like 8 feet. You can look at this up online. It was like 8 feet long by 4 feet wide. And there was all kinds of rats in there with wheels and tunnels but the same 2 water bottles, one with regular water and then the other one with water laced with heroin. The rats went from 10 times out of 10 killing themselves to 0. They almost never drank from the water laced with heroin. And if they did it sporadically, but they never did it to the point where they would kill themselves because they had something to live for. They're having sex with other rats. They're running around in tubes. They have a life, So Portugal saw this experiment about 20 years ago. I would say actually maybe about 23 years ago now. And they decided to make because they had one of the highest heroin addiction rates per capita of any other country in the world and a huge drug issue. So they decided to make all drugs legal, from crack to cannabis, all across the board. And what they did was all the money that they were making on this war against drugs with the probation departments and the people going to jail and the privatization of jail and the rehabs, they put it all into giving the drug addict their life back, right? And one of the things that they did was they made a stipulation where any company that's in Portugal that wishes to hire an ex-drug addict, the country of Portugal will pay that employee's wages for, I think it was 8 to 10 months. So now you have all these employers that are hiring these drug addicts. Who cares if it doesn't work out? It's free labor, right? And now 20 years later, it took a long time, right? It took a long time for this to actually really pan out. But now 20 years later, nobody wants to go back to the way that it was. Crime is down. Drug use in general is down. Everything is down all across the board. So now you see Oregon saw this and they just said, we're going to put this into play. I think it was maybe, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago now. And I was recently out in Oregon 3 years ago and it was crazy, but everything is legal out there right now. Meth, crack, coke, heroin, it doesn't matter. It's all legal. And the homelessness rate went through the roof, right? So they're kind of going through this thing where it's almost like, everybody wants to go there because it's like a free for all, it's like a wild, wild west of narcotic use and everything. But they're still following the protocol that Portugal went through, and they're hoping that this thing will pan out. Now, there's a lot of resistance against it, but they're finally realizing that taking the money and putting it into the criminalization of the drug addict is wrong. Absolutely wrong. What we should be doing is getting these people the help that they need and trying to give them their life back. So you kind of see like a reversal role here where we're making money off of the criminal, we're criminalizing the criminal, and you're giving him felonies and you're making it difficult for him to give him his job back. And now we're starting to see that, like this is wrong, and I'm hoping that we begin to see that within the pharmaceutical company. Like this is wrong. Like the way that we go about this with our drugs in this country is just wrong all across the board, all across the board, misuse and mislabeling. And yeah.
Those pharmaceutical companies are interested in one thing only, and that's money.
The medicine almost killed me, it's been 10 years since I started hearing voices. And it almost took me out. And for about 7 years, I was so worthless. I couldn't do anything. I could barely even stand because the energy drain that you're talking about was so bad. And the dizziness that came with it, and weakness, So I'm finally coming out of that. Thank God. I mean, it's just, it's a miracle that I'm even alive right now. But I'm getting through this whole experience, Jerry, I've gotten these crazy physical sensations of all different kinds. While I've been sitting here, I've been in incredible pain from these entities. In our group, this Parawareness group that we've started, in our group, there's a lot of people who are going through this similar thing where it's this physical anguish of all different kinds. And I'm wondering if you have saw a lot of that, because you said the high pitched ringing wasn't as much of a common theme in your studies. So what about that? What about the crazy intense physical sensations?
I tell you what popped into my mind when you started talking about this. When I was working psych crisis in the emergency rooms, they were having schizophrenics come in right off the street. I mean, they were more dangerous than they were in the prison or jail. They were right off the street. The police would drag them in and say, "Here, you deal with this guy." And I was having to do psych evaluations on these people, and the voices with some of the schizophrenics were so persistent and so strong that I couldn't get information from them. Okay, but I heard somewhere that if you vividly imagine what happens to these voices to them, it happens to them on the other side. Okay. So I figured, well, I'll try that. So I had patients coming in, the voices are screaming, they're yelling, I can't get any information out of them. I can't do my evaluation because their voices are screwing them up. So I'd close my eyes and I'd vividly visualize duct tape being wrapped around the mouths of the voices, and then after I open my eyes, I'd say, okay, can you hear them now? And they say, no, they're quiet.
Can I show you something real quick? This is actually, it's funny that you bring this up. I don't know if you can see that image. Just all people with duct tape over their mouths, right? So that's exactly what I had to do. I had to, and it's nice with AI lately because I can actually tell AI, bring me up an image of an audience with duct tape over their mouths, right? And then I can actually see it consciously and burn that into my memory. And every time I want them to shut up, I imagine that.
Bottom line is the schizophrenic needs to get on some kind of positive spiritual path and stay there.
Yeah.
So, this is a dualistic universe. There's hot, there's cold, there's dark, there's light, there's, everything's opposite. So where they are is in the negative spiritual realm. Okay. They have to understand that that's one end of it. They've been on the wrong path and that they need to start moving toward the positive spiritual realm.
Yeah.
But what these things do, it's like if your mind is like a radio receiver, the patient can try to turn the frequency up, to 23rd Psalm and that kind of stuff, but the voices turn it back down again. So it's a constant battle for your attention. If you don't take your attention and turn it against them, they will take it and turn it against you.
It's a constant battle for an association with the mind. Eventually I came to the belief that they don't say truth or lies, but they say whatever will create the greatest attachment to your mind in that present moment.
The most guilt, the most fear, the most, they don't care. They don't care. They want to create the most disruption, the most paranoia, the most guilt, the most fear they possibly can.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's like they remind me of fishermen. They'll bait the hook and they'll throw it out in front of you and see if you bite on it.
Yeah.
Oh, you're stupid and ugly. You bite on that? Oh yeah, okay. Right. And then they reel you in. Well, how about this? Yeah. They're always after your attention. They want to turn your emotional state negative.
Yeah.
And it's not like they just hit schizophrenics. They hit everybody.
Yeah.
They'll hit schizophrenics because most schizophrenics are wounded. They've undergone tremendous trauma in their lives. They're wounded. So they go after the weak ones first, just like a shark. It'll go after the smallest and the weakest in a pack of fish. These things, they can smell, like a shark smells blood, they can smell negative emotional energy. And they'll hit everybody. You could be driving along and kind of like all of a sudden it'd be, what would it be like to turn into oncoming traffic? Or standing on a bridge and you go, I wonder what it'd be like to jump. Where do those thoughts come from?
Right.
Yeah.
I was actually, just on a little aside here, I was driving 2 days ago and I have a history of my body being taken over. So they will actually physically take over my limbs, and
I've seen that.
And so I'm driving and all of a sudden a voice very clearly says, what if I jerk the wheel? with your hands, and so it's scary because in all these moments now, as you're going through life now, in all these different moments, you go, "Uh-oh, I hope they don't decide to do this to me,"
Mm-hmm.
What can you do?
I had one here in Arizona with, grass doesn't last out here very well unless you put tons of water on it. So we'd go out with a machete and clear the cactus, to kind of cut the yard. So I was out there one day, I think this happened a year or 2 years ago. I have a beautiful white husky, and she was out there running around. She wasn't bothering me. She's just in the backyard running around while I'm cutting the cactus. And she runs by, and here's this voice booms into my head, cut her head off. Here I have the machete in my hand. And I was like, that did not feel good. That was upsetting. No. I knew that wasn't me.
Right.
And I knew I never would do anything like that. But that doesn't stop them from trying. Somebody who's more unstable might have done that.
Oh yeah.
But they hit everybody. They don't just hit schizophrenics. They hit everybody. You're just minding your own business, and all of a sudden you have this horrible thought come through your mind to do this horrible thing that you'd never do, but it's not your thought. It's not your intention. It doesn't belong to you. I even had one guy write me. He said, "Oh, I heard what you were saying about, they hit everybody." He said, "I was standing in back of my boss the other day, and the voice came and said, spit on him." And he said, that was them. I knew it was them. So, the schizophrenics have to realize that these voices aren't hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia says. These are entities. They're parasitic, dangerous entities that are trying to take them over. And they've taken over a lot of them. I mean, 50,000 people in the United States kill themselves every year. And that's what we have: more psychiatrists, more psychologists, more psychiatric drugs than we ever had in the history of mankind. And yet, 50,000 people are killing themselves in the U.S. every year. So you look at what the mental health, the Western mental health system, the whole Western mental health system is based around these toxic drugs that cure absolutely nothing. I mean, look at their success rate. It's absolutely horrible, And the priest of this global antipsychotic movement have a suicide rate equivalent to that of the schizophrenics, which is 3 to 5 times higher than the general population. So psychiatrists are killing themselves at the same rate that schizophrenics are, So, about 50,000 people died in the Vietnam War. Close to 50,000 people are killing themselves in the United States year after year after year after year after year. So what does that say about this psychiatric, drug-fueled mental health system? It ain't working. It ain't working. Look at the crime rate. Look at the prisons. The prisons are full of meth addicts and crazy people. I mean, they've shut down all the state hospitals. They used to have some place where these people could at least go. Now they're out on the streets. They can't hold a job. What are they going to do? They have to steal and rob stuff in order to survive, or sell drugs. I'd give this mental health system an F-. They need to do something that works, which is the MACE energy method. It would work better than all this crap that they're feeding these people, these toxic drugs. Those drugs have their place. I mean, believe me, I've seen patients that were so violent, that were so psychotic, that were so crazy, that that's the only thing you could do with them, is to drug them down to keep them calm because they were so freaking dangerous. And there's a lot of people like that. That's where these drugs are necessary. I mean, that's where they're the most useful. But to put a regular schizophrenic on those drugs and say there is no other treatment and keep them on them for years, they're destroying these people. And they're also destroying their hope when they say there is no other treatment. This is the only way you got to go. This is a life sentence. There is no other treatment for schizophrenia. That's what these people are telling these schizophrenics.
How would you like to answer a few questions from the audience? So I put out a post. All right. So this is from Peter and OTIR. Do you think paranormal as a whole is an assortment of independent events or different appearances of the same force?
Yeah. I think there's a wide array of different spirits out there, and they're always out there. I mean, I've seen a number of people who were using Ouija boards and speaking to these entities. Next thing they know, that entity is speaking to them in their mind, and they're just as psychotic as anybody else.
Do you think that some people are experiencers, or is everybody and only a few people are just made aware? Meaning, and I think you actually kind of touched base on this. So do you think that this is something that happens in the minds of all people, but only a couple of us, like the schizophrenics, or like we just kind of become aware of this, whether it's through trauma or drug use, but are you under the impression that this is happening everywhere?
No, I believe it's happening everywhere. These things are come in, and you talk to anybody, and they'll go, you say, well, did you ever have a horrible thought that just came out of nowhere that, kind of took you back and horrified you, but you would never act on it, Yeah, almost everybody will admit to having something like that, they just pop in there, and it's almost like they're testing, well, we'll throw this thought in there and see how he reacts to it. And even if you don't react to it, it upsets you. And when you're upset, that's food for them. Like that one with that told me to cut the head off my dog. Even though I would never do anything like that, I was upset that I had a machete in my hand and that the dog was right there, and here was a voice in my head telling me to cut his head off. That was upsetting. It's like you're looking, and here I am right there with this machete, with this thought in my head to cut his. No, that wasn't me. I would never act on it, but it upset me, and that was food for whatever entity put that thought in my head. Swedenborg says virtually every negative thought that comes in your head does not belong to you.
I've actually had the thought that our free will as humans exists solely in the positive polarity, meaning that there is almost like there's a constant oppression on this planet that's always trying to push us to do things that will create suffering in our lives and suffering in the lives of other people. And it's only when we resist that and do random acts of kindness, when we learn to love one another, are we actually expressing our free will to its fullest. Everything else is an allowance of manipulation.
Yeah, they don't want that to happen, because then there's no leash for them.
So I have another question here. This is from Georgie within our community. I have a question for you to ask Dr. Marzinsky. I watched in its entirety a 3-hour interview with Owen Benjamin.
Oh, yeah.
It is an ongoing topic of conversation with the things that follow me about how they learn to speak the English language. I'm interested to know if he has had experience in being spoken to in other languages, and does he speak other languages?
Now, what they do, they have to be able to speak the language of the person where they live. I mean, because now I have had instances where the person says, "Oh yeah, this voice is speaking in another language," but see, that doesn't serve their purpose. They can't upset you if you can't understand what they're saying. If you don't get upset at what they're saying, if you don't believe what they're saying, then they're wasting their energy. So that's why the That's a Lie program, again, that's on my website under jerrymarzinsky.com under articles. Any of you guys struggling with compulsive thoughts or negative thoughts or voices, go get that program and study it. It was developed by Sherry Sweeney, who was hearing voices herself. She's the co-author of my book here. And if you want to know more about the voices, this will tell you how we got to the point where we realized that these things were not hallucinations. All right? Again, you can order that on my website, or you can get it off of Amazon, but it goes into how we came to the conclusion that these things were not hallucinations. I couldn't see them, I couldn't hear them, but the last few years that I was working in the ER and in the prisons, I could feel them. I could feel them strongly. It was like this icky electrical energy. There's no other feeling like it. And I could feel how strong they were. I could feel how upset they were, and I could feel how hard they were trying to attack me. And it was so reliable that I could, walk into the ER and ask a patient, "Are you hearing voices?" And he'd lie to me and say no. And I'd say, "Yes, you are, and this is how strong they are right now."
Wow.
And they'd go,
"Wow,
how did you know that? Do you hear them too?" I said, "No, I can't hear them, but I can feel them." And there was one time I even got attacked over the computer when I was working with a patient over Zoom. I felt that same feeling, man. That thing on the other end didn't like it and came right over the computer, and they were somewhere thousands of miles away. So there is no time space for them.
No, and I agree with that. That's one of the biggest illusions, and this is what kind of brings about in recent times here the targeted individual community is the introduction of electronics within this phenomena. So you have people whose phones are being manipulated, their computers are being hacked and manipulated, and things are just starting to be pushed. They're feeling electrical impulses coming from their routers, from their televisions, from 5G towers. They're becoming very sensitive to these energies that are coming off, and it's very negative, all of it.
I'm surprised we haven't been interfered with now, because on almost every interview I do, there's some kind of interference. The sound goes out, the video goes out, the computer goes out. That's, something happens that screws things up, and we usually overcome it. But there's some times where it's so strong that we just have to reschedule.
I experience a lot of that too. A lot of electronic anomalies.
It's almost expected with me now.
I was at work today, and I was thinking in my head, like of all the things that they could do, to disrupt this from happening, and then I just kept saying, that's a lie. Like, that's not going to happen. There's no, like I had to I set the intention a lot. Like I'm in a process of setting the intention, right? Because I had an experience one time, and this was recently, where I was laying on my couch and one of the voices chimed in and it said, I'm going to drive down your street in 10 seconds and honk the horn. And I was like, that's bullshit. And then all of a sudden I hear this car coming, Jerry, and I count it down 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. And then this guy laid on the horn. Beep, 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 beep.
But they can do that. I've seen them do that. I had one client who recovered where the voices told him they wanted to go fishing. And at that point I'm going, oh, come on, man, you're bullcrapping me now. He goes, oh, no, honest to God. He said, I went and bought a fishing rod. And we went out, him and his voices went out to the Columbia River, and they're friggin' fishing. He said the voices told him where to throw his hook, when to throw it, and when to move on. He said he was the only one catching fish on the river that day. And this was after the guy had recovered. This is after we got rid of the voices, and it took several months to get rid of them, but we got rid of them. So when here's psychiatry saying this is a life sentence, that's bullcrap. It's absolute bullcrap. There are ways to fight back against these things. There are ways to get rid of them. There are ways to drain the negative energy that they feed off of. There's things you can do about it. You're not helpless. Don't believe that crap.
Is there anything, Jerry, that any chance that this MACE method or something like this we can get it into psychiatry? I mean, is there any chance that what can we do? Is my basic question. What can we do?
It's one of these things where they're not going to want it out there, because this MACE could take the place of 3/4 of what psychiatry does right now, with a positive effect. They don't want it out there, and neither does psychology. Matter of fact, the MACE people went. It originated in Australia. They went to one of the universities in Australia and demonstrated to the professors there how well this worked. They agreed, hey, this works. And MACE said, well, you should be teaching it in your universities. And they told MACE, you give us the patent and then we'll consider it. And MACE said, no, it took me a lifetime to develop this. I'm not going to turn the patent over to you. So that went out. So they went to the legislature, the Australian legislature, showed them how well it worked, and they agreed, but they didn't do anything about it. Psychiatry doesn't want this out there. Psychology doesn't want this out there. Where people can go, they can go to causisminstitute.com, and they can find a MACE therapist there. There's a whole list of them. Okay? And they don't have to be in your country. They can see you over Zoom anywhere in the world where there's Wi-Fi. And you can go to my website again at jerrymarzinsky.com, go to videos. There's easily at least 100 of them. There's a whole bunch of articles there. And I think what would be most useful immediately for people who are hearing voices is the That's a Lie program written by Sherry. It's under articles on the website. Just look for it. It's labeled That's a Lie program. The other thing is the list of patterns. For any of you guys out there that are working with schizophrenics, that don't believe this, go get that list of patterns and you'll see them for yourselves. It's not hidden anywhere. They're right in front of your eyes. All you got to do is open your eyes and look. Those patterns are right there. And if these voices are running patterns, they cannot be hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia is telling the whole Western world. These things are entities. They run fixed patterns. And if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. And you can see these patterns for yourself. They're right there. They're not hiding them behind some genetic disorder where you have to be a genetic specialist to see, or the biochemical imbalance thing where you have to be a biochemist to, they hid that for like 40 years between their biochemical imbalance crap. They had the whole Western world fooled into thinking schizophrenia was due to a chemical imbalance theory. It's a complete lie.
Well, Jerry, thank you so much, seriously, for being here. I really appreciate your work. I know that you're doing a lot for this community, and being personally a schizophrenic who, like I said, almost got taken out by the medicine. In my opinion, man, I really appreciate the work you're doing. You're probably saving a lot of lives.
I want you to meet what saved my life.
Oh, look at that cutie pie!
Yeah.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah, this is our little one, Lucy. Yeah, so this
doll.
is what. This was the catalyst for the motivation that I had and the determination. That's all this right here. So, man, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Jerry.